Let's talk today, without exaggeration really, about the cult film Avatar. Right now, this topic is very much in the spotlight and resonating, and in general, how it all started with this film is a really interesting story. And I suggest you look at the film through the context of the Akashic Chronicles. I've already heard from you that this film is in fact a description, so to speak, of what is happening in the Akashic Chronicles. To start, I want you to tell me what personally interested and fascinates you so much about this film.
What I truly appreciate about this film is how it portrays, in a remarkably simple and incredibly organic manner, exactly how a person can deeply engage and communicate with the vibrant space around them, and how an individual can harmoniously interact with the beauty of nature and the subtle energies that surround us all. About how it was shown that there is a certain universal mind, a higher mind, and that people interact with this mind, they connect to it. And this is very similar to how I connect to the Akashic records and teach other people to do the same, and how this process happens for us. That's why I really like this movie, despite the fact that there's a lot of shooting, which for me is a bit of a side effect compared to the wonderful things that are embedded in it.
It shows one of the first and most key meanings is the unity of all living things around us, represented through the image of the tree of Aiwa. What does this mean for us in the practice of our lives? We can extrapolate this to our own lives, as if everything really is like that for us here and now.
Not just extrapolate, it actually is that way. It's just that, unfortunately, people today are in such a state of consciousness, well, most people, that they don't realize this. But in fact, that's exactly how it is. When I access the Akashic records, when I tune in and look at the subtle energetic level, at what humanity looks like, what our planet looks like, it is one organism, it is one system. We are all connected to each other. My thoughts influence the consciousness of all humanity. And your thoughts also have a certain impact on the consciousness of this humanity. We are all connected, and to some extent, we all influence each other, and we all depend on one another, and we are all within this single system. That is why it is important to understand this. If people understood this, there would be no war now, and we would always help each other. And this can be developed. You can develop this sense of unity and the feeling that, for example, if your neighbor suddenly cuts his finger, if he is in pain or something happens to him, you will feel it yourself and immediately rush to help him.
In fact, the way out of the paradigm of thinking in which we live is to move away from focusing solely on ourselves. That is, everything is very personal now, and we are very focused on what is happening specifically in our own lives, although the paradox is that most people do not take responsibility for their own lives. At the same time, they want to keep focusing on themselves. Is it even possible now to adopt the worldview you just mentioned, where we would truly feel both each other's pain and joy for one another, which is probably even harder to feel than each other's pain?
Well, actually, if people really focused on themselves, they would notice and feel these connections, these threads that extend from us to all other people, to nature. How do we interact through all these channels? Energetic ones. But the thing is, people are just focusing on the informational noise that exists in their sphere, in this kind of informational energetic sphere. So they neither feel the world around them nor immerse themselves within, because to truly sense the world, you need to dive into yourself. And they just remain in this kind of stupor, neither here nor there, simply lost, like they're asleep, as people say, in the Matrix.
Is it really possible to get out of this?
Yes, of course.
How?
With the help of meditation, with the help of practices that allow us to immerse our consciousness within ourselves, to see and feel who I really am, to sense these connections we have with the external environment, how I am connected to this world, how I perceive it. All of this is done through developing sensitivity. It's like muscles, it can actually be trained. In the same way, there are people who, for example, can't lift a heavy weight, a barbell, for instance. Someone can bench press 100 kilograms, while for someone else, even 20 is difficult. This can be trained, this sensitivity can be developed, and this sensitivity is not just empathy. It's a subtle perception of the world, of the energy that actually makes up the world. Probably about 85% of the environment we live in consists of this. And if we limit ourselves to interacting only with the world that we can touch and see, then we are living only within these 15% of the entire space we could actually interact with.
By the way, it's interesting. You said we can feel and we can see. In an avatar, there's a key phrase, I see you. They repeat this phrase several times during very pivotal moments. And these moments aren't connected to our human perception. They involve both friendship and love. So it's something that seems to be more than just the feelings we can experience. What can you compare this state of I see you to? Have you ever felt this state yourself, the one that could be described with these words? And what lesson can we take from understanding that this is possible?
Yes, actually, what it really means is I totally feel you, and I've experienced this state more than once. It's a unique state. For example, I remember when I first met Ishita Gaya, who is a very well-known and respected spiritual channeler based in Ukraine. At our very first meeting together, she looked me directly in the eyes, and that is exactly when I saw this profound message. I see you, or perhaps I truly hear you. I saw as if the person was completely scanning me, and I didn't need to explain anything. I didn't need to say anything. In other words, the connection was already happening. That is, we could already interact on a different level. Also, with spiritual teachers, people who practice spiritual disciplines, I had the same feeling. When it's enough just to meet eyes and you can sense that this connection is established. And
this, by the way, is a very special human state that not everyone can reach. Because they don't understand its value, this state, and perhaps they might even be afraid of it. Because how is that possible? Does it mean that I will be seen as I truly am? Does it mean that what I hide within myself will be felt, what I don't accept in myself, what I, on the contrary, maybe want to transform, or maybe I don't want to at all? And it seems to me that it would be appropriate here to ask the question, in what way, why might a person block their own development? The development of such a state of consciousness that would allow them to live in the state of I see you.
It's because of fear. A certain level of consciousness is based on fear, on low vibrations. When a person has experienced hurt, experienced pain, and gets stuck in that experience, then they begin to live in a consciousness of fear and become afraid to open up. They are afraid of not being understood, afraid that someone will hurt them again. And in such cases, it is very difficult to reach that level of openness and sincerity. But this is a kind of defense mechanism that is relevant in certain situations. For example, if there really is some threat, if there are aggressive people nearby. But you need to learn how to regulate this. Like a turtle, it can stick out its limbs when it needs to interact with the outside world, move, eat, or do something else. And when there is some threat, it simply hides in its shell. Yes, and we have to choose when we want to be open, to be accessible with those people whom we understand will not judge us, who will understand us, support us, and inspire us. And we can also close ourselves off a little in places where we see some kind of aggressive environment where we could potentially be harmed.
That is, to use these two states as tools with which you live your reality.
Yes, you need to learn how to manage these states.
Another interesting image from the film, which is quite mystical, is the connection, a direct physical connection between the tree and living beings. A living being with another living being, they literally connect. And in fact, for me, this is an image of the way they live through this connection. That is, they don't just know that such a possibility exists to connect with each other in this way, like to talk, to communicate, to feel, and so on. But they actually do it, and this is their way of life. In other words, it's their reality. Very often for us, it happens that we know something, but we don't practice it. We learn something, see it, hear it, understand that, well, in principle, it's available, but we don't get to the point of taking action. How do you see this image?
I really like how the characters in this film tune in, as if they truly connect with the animals on a deep level, how they become a single mind, a single powerful entity when they need to, showing a profound bond that transcends words and actions in every scene. And it's very similar to how I attune myself to the people who come to me for consultations. It's roughly the same process. And what I teach myself in the course, I also teach people to attune themselves. And it can be done with people, with animals, with certain guardians, with places, with energies, even with physical objects. You can attune yourself and feel these energies, understand what's wrong there, how we can help, and perhaps harmonize something. And this is not just some mythical invented principle shown in a movie. This comes from my own experience, from my practical life. This is something we can actually do. And in fact, even telepathy is not a myth. It's something that can be developed. I've had many instances in my life when I think about something and immediately the person next to me says it out loud. I think many people have experienced situations like this as well. And when, for example, I conduct a session for someone who is also a guide, a person who has developed their intuition, there's this process where I receive some information and before I have a chance to say it, the person says it themselves. In other words, we start to perceive the same information from the same source at the same time. So all of this is possible.
There's also a moment in the film that shows how the main characters are afraid. The first contact with the animals, you mentioned the animals they connect to, and these animals are in fact their, so to speak, brothers or spiritual brothers. They actually become one whole, as you said. And so this moment, when you connect to such a beast, one you can't even control because it's a separate personality, a separate living being, but you have to establish a connection with it. What can you say about the inner beast which can be mastered using the same practical method and approach, and about those people who perhaps may seem aggressive to us, like this beast, for example, but then you build a relationship with them? A relationship?
That's an interesting question, so multifaceted. Here, it's important to understand that the inner beast, no, we might call it perhaps our shadow side. It's not something negative, and even getting angry is normal. Even feeling some aggression inside is normal. You just need to understand in what ways we can channel this energy so that it brings us benefit rather than destroying us from within or damaging our relationships with other people or living beings on the outside. And there are different ways to do this, ways ranging from sports to various practices, including deeper meditative ones. That is, here everyone can choose what suits them individually. Also, regarding relationships with other people, we need to understand that if we want to somehow positively influence these relationships, if we want perhaps even to change someone because something makes us uncomfortable in these relationships, you need to look for a way to influence the other person by changing yourself. This is the best and most effective way. Think about what this person reflects that is also within me. For example, if someone is ignoring me, I should try the mirror principle and see where I am ignoring myself. Where am I ignoring my own desires, those that are in my heart? Where am I ignoring some of my own needs, maybe working without resting, even the needs of my body? We need to look deeper. By influencing ourselves, we can influence other people, other living beings, and the environment as a whole. And
if we talk about fear and about control, how does that work? In fact, we try to live, and how does it not work when the main character tries to tame his beast, his brother, with whom he later unites and realizes during this kind of struggle that fighting doesn't work, but something else does. And it turns out that what works is synergy. And what can we say from our point of view? How can we apply this to our own lives? What do we need to stop fighting against?
we need to stop fighting against everything that happens in our lives. And what's the first thing we need to do if we want to change reality? The first thing is to accept what is with love and gratitude, to accept the circumstances that exist in our lives, the events, to accept the people, relatives, friends, enemies, those who are present in our lives, accept them as our teachers, as those who contribute to our spiritual and emotional growth. And when we begin to accept the conditions of life in which we find ourselves, we start to develop the potential to achieve something better and to change things. This is the only way it works. If we constantly criticize and are always dissatisfied with what is happening to us, we cut off our own opportunities to change it.
Society, on the contrary, says that you should be dissatisfied with what you have, and then supposedly something will be born from that. The strength to go and conquer, to go and do something, to somehow change your life for the better. And it is precisely this energy of dissatisfaction that can become a resource for changing your life for the better. Just now, through the space of the Akashic Records, you conveyed to us a completely different, I would even say diametrically opposite idea. Please ask the guardians, why is that? Why are we living now in a world where such truths are not spoken on social media?
Because those who wish to be deceived will be deceived. And there are people who want to experience being in illusion, being in a dream, and they are given such an opportunity, and that is their choice. There is also a choice and an opportunity for people who are ready and want to wake up. They want to live this life consciously and consciously develop spiritually and evolve. And here each person simply chooses one of these paths.
If we talk about this very development, then there is the Tree of Souls in which memory is stored. Ancestral memory of the forebears, where avatars connect and receive answers to their questions. What can we do to try living this way?
This is actually a really great example with the family tree. Just yesterday, I had something like this in my Telegram channel. There was a heated discussion about the guardians of the lineage and in general about souls, how they reincarnate, how they remain in the family system, where they come from, how it all works. Because in reality, the family system is quite complex. It's a complex mechanism, a complex structure, and it originates from the creator, from whom all family channels stem, and then they branch out among people. And there are a great many of these family channels, family systems, and indeed through these channels we can receive certain energy, starting from the energy of the creator and ending with the energy of our ancestors. We can receive the experience of our forebears, which we need at certain moments in our lives. We can receive, and perhaps this is the most valuable thing, the blessing from this ancestral energy, from the source, from the creator. And blessing is the most precious thing that exists in this world, because when you receive a blessing from your elders, from your lineage, it is a kind of magic that opens all doors and possibilities for you.
Please decode for us the image of how in the third avatar, the youngest of the main characters, the girl, seems to have a mission to open access, to make a request, to create for the Aiwa mother. That is, we see a new image of this main goddess, of space, and so on. And she can't do it. She can't connect to her the first time, nor the second, nor the third. And then it happens that she goes and seems to start seeing Awa's face. Her brothers join in, help her, and begin to guide her. And finally, she makes this request, and Awa hears her. Please decode this for us.
As you speak right now, I literally get goosebumps remembering that moment. There is actually a very deep meaning there. We see that going to God on your own, developing spiritually on your own is very hard. It's difficult. Even if we have potential, even if we have abilities, we can't handle it alone. And, it's like, for example, if you have children, let's say you have a lot of kids, 3 or 4, and parents always like it when their children interact with each other, when they're friendly, when they help one another, when they cooperate in some way. It's the same with God. For him, we are all his children. We are all parts of him. He really likes it when we interact with each other. And this doesn't just apply to material or practical things. First and foremost, it concerns our spiritual development. That's why churches are needed. It means that where 2 or 3 gather and praise my name, I am present there. Essentially, what this implies is that when people gather in unity to pursue their own spiritual growth and development, they will unlock a greater variety of opportunities. They receive more of these blessings. They gain more spiritual energy because this is our natural state. In other words, this is how people enter this natural state of unity and mutual assistance to move together towards some higher goal. So this is natural for us. And when we take our natural position, everything immediately starts to happen much more easily and effectively. That's why it's very important to gather together with like-minded people where you can talk about esoteric or spiritual topics, where you won't be considered some kind of weirdo. You can share everything you see and feel, where you can be supported and inspired. By the way, I'm currently planning to create an online space called Wings, precisely where people can come together, people who have already begun their inner journey, to feel certain energies, to begin awakening for those who strive for spiritual growth, where I will provide practices, facilitate communication, answer questions, and where we can exchange our experiences and energies. It is precisely in such spaces that we can achieve the kind of success that was shown in Avatar, when that girl, together with her brothers and friends, was able to reach out to a higher intelligence.
Let each of us have such a circle of communication in which we can receive, well, the name is very beautiful, wings, metaphorically speaking, receive these very wings. Another interesting symbol is that Jake, the main character, literally becomes his avatar. That is, at first he simply had an avatar, and then he actually became this avatar. And what's interesting is that the body changed, but he himself did not change. When he first transferred there, in other words, he essentially remained at the same starting level as when he was just a human. And then, through the process of living and experiencing each day, through the challenges he faced. Throughout the entire film, through all the transformations, he actually started to think like an avatar, like this community, like this living being, to act like him, and he had to adjust himself. And here I want you to comment on 2 points. The first is that when he became an avatar physically, but had not yet fully embodied it himself, so to speak. And the second point is how important it is to truly live through your experience and draw transformation from it. Well,
actually, I would put it a little differently. I see it the opposite way. At first, as a human, he tried to enter this avatar. He would connect to it when his consciousness was still essentially in the human body, but through that human body, he controlled the avatar's body. And then he gained this experience which began to change his consciousness. And after his consciousness started to change and eventually changed, this made it possible in the future to transfer his consciousness from the human body directly into the body of the avatar itself, so to speak. Into the Na'vi, this being who, in my opinion, is more advanced than the human he once was. And this very clearly shows that, in fact, our body depends on our consciousness. Even our physical body, if we don't reincarnate, don't die, and don't move on to some next life or next body, while remaining in this body by changing our consciousness, we also influence our body. And through the body, we can also influence our consciousness. That's why it's also important to understand how closely connected our physical structure is to our spiritual and energetic structure, and how we can influence both sides through these elements. And often people who have problems with their physical body, with health, with weight, all of this has some root in their consciousness. And by changing their consciousness, they can then influence their physical body. And the second point, which is a symbol in this story, in this fragment, is of course reincarnation. When our consciousness reaches a different level, in the next life we receive a different body. It may no longer be like this one. It may be lighter, it may be more flexible, it may be more subtle, more energetic. In other words, we receive the body that corresponds to our consciousness. Or we can even receive a spiritual body and, as they say, exit this wheel of rebirth, the wheel of samsara, and then exist in the spiritual world where there is no suffering, where there are none of these. Thank you. None of the trials we face here, and attain our eternal life.
Another interesting point is that the people in this film, although their civilization is supposedly more technologically advanced, actually appear to be more backward than the Na'vi civilization, and in general more backward than this environment, this ecosystem.
A great point. This indicates that technology does not mean the development of humanity, the development of culture, or the development of consciousness. And this is a very good analogy with what is happening to us now. We see how technology is developing, especially how it develops at the level of weaponry, at the level of military conflicts, while the conflicts themselves do not disappear anywhere and people remain in such an aggressive state. People are in a state of their great, enormous ego, which they cannot satisfy in any way, and they constantly prevent those around them from living in peace. This is, in a way, a clear and significant indication that modern technology does not necessarily mean developed consciousness.
Cool, I really like that. We've touched on some interesting ideas together. It was interesting to talk about this and hear your opinion, to see how you view things. And I'd also be interested to read what people write, what the audience says in the comments on this topic. Maybe what meanings they see in this film or what resonated with them the most. Please write in the comments what you liked and like about this film, what resonates with you. Or maybe you'll choose